grave whisper.
I grew up in a town so small it barely showed up on maps. One of those places where the highway curves just enough to miss you if you blink. The river cut through the woods south of town, wide and shallow, slow enough that you could hear insects skimming its surface at night. We didn't have a bridge back then, just the ford. People called it Hollis Ford, named after a family that vanished before I was born. No signposts, no warnings, just tire-worn dirt sloping down into the water, then back up again on the other side. You crossed it if you had to. You didn't cross it after dark. I was 17 the first time I ignored that rule. That summer was dry, hot, and tense. The kind of summer where everyone was angry for no reason. My dad drank more than usual. My mom barely spoke. I spent most nights driving back roads with my friend Mark, windows down, radio low, pretending we'd leave town one day. The ford was a shortcut home from the old quarry road. It saved 10 minutes, 10 minutes that mattered when you were young and stupid. Mark hesitated when the headlights hit the water. "You hear what they said about that place?" he asked. I laughed. Every place in this town has a story. The water was barely knee-deep, moonlight breaking across it like cracked glass. I eased my truck forward. Tires dipped. Water climbed the doors, and for a moment, everything was normal. Then, the engine coughed. Just once. The headlights flickered. I remember that silence most of all. No frogs, no crickets, just the river sliding past us, slow and deliberate, like it was thinking. "Don't stop," Mark said. I didn't plan to. But the truck lurched, like something underneath had shifted and stalled, dead center of the ford. I tried the ignition. Nothing. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were in the water just ahead of the hood. Bare feet, too many of them, pressed into the silt as if someone had been standing there for a long time. They didn't wash away. The current moved around them. Mark leaned forward, squinting. Those weren't there a second ago. Something touched the underside of the truck. Not a bump, not a scrape. A hand. I know how that sounds, but I felt it. Fingers dragging slowly across the metal, testing, counting. The truck rocked gently, like someone leaning their weight against it. I shouted and kicked the door open, splashing into the water. It was colder than it should have been, shockingly cold. I spun around, heart hammering, expecting to see someone, kids, a prank, anything. There was no one, but the water was moving wrong. It wasn't flowing past me anymore. It was pulling toward the truck. Mark screamed my name. The headlights snapped back on. The engine roared like it had been waiting for permission. I dove back inside, slammed the door, and floored it. We shot up the far bank, mud spraying behind us. I didn't slow down until we were on gravel, breath tearing out of my chest. Neither of us spoke. When I finally looked back, the ford was empty. No footprints, no ripples, just moonlight on water. We didn't tell anyone that night, but a week later, a man named Caleb Turner didn't make it home. His truck was found at Hollis Ford, engine cold, driver's door open. No body. They said he drowned, but I knew better, because 2 days after that, I went back in daylight and saw new footprints pressed deep into the mud, bare feet facing the road. After Caleb Turner disappeared, the town did what it always did, lowered its voice. People stopped using the ford altogether. Trucks detoured the long way around. Kids were warned without being told why. Hollis Ford became one of those places adults mentioned with a look instead of words. My dad noticed I was tense. He noticed everything when he was sober, which wasn't often. But that week he asked me straight out if I knew something. I said no. That was a lie. I kept thinking about the footprints, how they faced the road, like something wanted to cross over or follow. A few days later, I went to the town library. It was mostly tax records and old church bulletins, but the back room held bound newspapers going back a century. I didn't know what I was looking for, just something that made sense. It didn't take long. The first article was dated 1911. A farmer named Elias Hollis vanished while driving cattle across the river ford during a drought. No body recovered. His boots were found on the riverbank, neatly placed side by side. That detail stuck with me. I kept reading. A traveling salesman missing after taking the ford at dusk. 2 brothers, enlisted men, home on leave. Only 1 truck came back. A local deputy responding to a stalled vehicle. His patrol car was found running, lights still on. Always men, always alone or nearly alone, always the ford. The articles were dry, official, no speculation, just facts and quiet conclusions. Accidental drowning, strong currents, poor visibility. But then I found the thing they didn't mean for anyone to read. A handwritten note folded into the back of a ledger. No date, just initials, RH. They don't pull you under, they ask you to step down. I stared at that line for a long time. That night, Mark called me. He sounded off, breathing too hard, words running together. I keep dreaming about it, he said. The other side. I can't touch bottom. I told him to stay away from the river, to stay away from me if he had to. He laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. You ever feel like something's waiting for you? 2 nights later, Mark went missing. His car was found parked near the old quarry road, keys still in the ignition, no signs of a struggle, no reason to leave the vehicle, except one. Footprints led away from the driver's side door, bare feet. I didn't go to the search party. I didn't need to. I knew where he'd gone. The sheriff called it coincidence. The town called it tragedy. My dad called it bad luck and poured another drink. I waited until early morning when the fog still hugged the ground like breath that hadn't decided to rise yet. I drove alone. Hollis Ford looked harmless in daylight, shallow water, sunlight cutting through the trees. You could see straight to the bottom, smooth stones, dark silt, nothing moving. I stepped out of the truck and approached the water's edge. "Mark?" I called. My voice sounded wrong there, like the air swallowed part of it. The water rippled, not from current, from steps. I watched the surface depress one after another, as if invisible feet were walking toward me from the center of the ford. The water didn't splash, it parted. Then I heard it, not a voice, more like pressure behind my ears, a suggestion. It's easier if you come down. My legs moved before my brain caught up. Cold flooded my boots. The riverbed felt soft, almost welcoming, like mud giving way to bare skin. Shapes formed beneath the surface, pale, human, faces turned upward, eyes open, mouths working silently. I stumbled back, fell hard onto the bank, heart slamming like it wanted out. The water went still. No ripples, no shapes. Just a ford that had taken another man and nearly taken me. That's when I understood something the town never said out loud. The ford didn't drown men. It kept them, and it wasn't done.
After that morning at Hollis Ford, I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the river again. The way the mud had softened beneath my boots, like it was adjusting itself to my weight, like it remembered how deep a man should sink. I quit my job at the feed store, told my boss I was sick. That wasn't a lie either. Whatever I'd brushed up against at the ford had crawled inside my head and made itself comfortable. I needed answers, not rumors, not warnings passed down in half sentences. I needed someone who had lived long enough to stop being afraid of telling the truth. That someone turned out to be Ruth Holloway. She lived alone at the edge of town in a house that leaned like it was tired of standing. People said she was strange, that she talked to herself. What they didn't say was that she'd buried 2 husbands, both gone, both last seen near the ford. When I knocked, she didn't ask who I was. She just opened the door and looked at my boots. "You went into it," she said, not a question. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and river water. She sat across from me at a table scarred with knife marks and burns. It doesn't like to be crossed, it likes to be visited. I asked her what it was. She smiled without warmth, a remembering. She told me the river was older than the town, older than the names on maps. Long before the ford was a crossing, it was a place where men tested themselves, proving strength, endurance, courage. Men went in alone. Some didn't come back. The river learned, Ruth said, learned what men leave behind when they think no one's watching. Fear, guilt, anger, want. I told her about the footprints, the shapes under the water. Mark. She nodded. It keeps what steps down willingly, and it only asks men. I asked why. She finally looked at my face. Because men are taught to answer challenges, she said, and the ford is nothing but a challenge pretending to be harmless. Before I left, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger than it looked. "If it calls you by name," she said, "don't answer. It means it knows you now." That night, it rained, hard. The river swelled, muddy and loud, eating away at its banks. I stood at my bedroom window and watched the storm wash the world clean, and then I heard it. My name. Not shouted, not spoken, heard the way you hear your own thoughts. "I know how deep you are." I covered my ears. It didn't help. Images flooded my mind. Men stepping into the water one by one, not struggling, not panicking, just walking down, calm and quiet, like they'd finally been invited somewhere they belonged. I saw Mark among them. His face wasn't afraid. That scared me more than anything.
The next morning, the sheriff announced another disappearance. A construction worker from out of town, last seen asking for directions toward the ford. I drove there before they could tape it off. The water was higher now, darker, angry looking. Footprints lined the bank, dozens, maybe hundreds, some old, some fresh, pressed into mud that should have washed away. They all faced the water. I stepped closer, heart pounding. My name came again, closer. I realized then that the ford wasn't just a place, it was a mouth, and it was opening.
By the time I got back to town, the sheriff had already blocked off Hollis Ford with yellow tape and a pair of sawhorses that looked laughably fragile against the river. Word traveled fast, faster than truth ever does. That afternoon, my dad finally talked. He was sober, too sober, which scared me more than his drinking ever had. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, eyes fixed on nothing. "You went out there," he said. I didn't answer. He nodded like he'd expected that. "They told us you would." That's when I learned about the committee. Every small town has one. Ours wasn't official, no titles, just men, always men, who'd lived there long enough to inherit responsibility they never asked for. Farmers, a preacher, the sheriff, my dad. They'd known about the ford since before I was born. In the early 70s, disappearances started happening too close together, too public. Outsiders noticed, reporters asked questions. So the town tried to end it. They dredged the ford, pulled up rocks, burned brush, brought in a backhoe, and tore into the riverbed until the water turned thick and red-brown. They found things down there, things that weren't supposed to be together. Boots without feet, watches still ticking, a wedding ring fused to bone. And a pit, a deep place where the silt never settled, where the water refused to fill completely, like it was avoiding something beneath. The preacher said it was wrong, said disturbing it would make things worse. They didn't listen. They filled the pit with concrete. The ford went quiet after that, for a while. But quiet, my dad said, wasn't the same as gone. It needs to remember, he told me. That's what the preacher said. If it can't remember itself, it starts remembering us. I asked him why they didn't warn people, why they let men keep crossing. He rubbed his face, hands shaking. "Because it only takes a few," he said, "and if you acknowledge it, it starts asking for more." That night, the rain came back, harder than before. I woke to the sound of water where water shouldn't be, slapping against the side of the house, creeping up the yard. The river was flooding. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You belong here." I didn't have to ask where here was. I drove through the storm, tires skidding on wet asphalt, heart racing. I told myself I was going to stop it, to warn someone, to do something. But every mile closer to the ford felt easier, lighter, like resistance was being peeled away. When I arrived, the barriers were gone, washed downstream or pushed aside. The river had eaten its banks and spread wide, reclaiming land it remembered owning. The concrete was visible beneath the water now, cracked, fractured, heaving upward like ribs through skin. I stepped out into the rain.
Men stood along the edge of the floodwater. Dozens of them. Some I recognized, some I didn't. All of them barefoot, all of them staring into the river with the same empty calm I'd seen on Mark's face in my dreams. My dad was there. He turned when he saw me, eyes glassy. "It's time," he said. "It's been too long." The water surged forward, swallowing the bank, licking at their ankles. I screamed his name. The river answered instead.
The rain came down so hard it felt solid, like sheets of metal slamming into the river. The ford was unrecognizable now. No clear edge, no gentle slope. Just water swallowing ground inch by inch, claiming what it had waited decades to reclaim. The men didn't move. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, eyes fixed on the flood like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. Their clothes were soaked through, plastered to their bodies, but none of them shivered, none of them blinked. My dad took one step forward. The water surged higher, rushing to meet his shin. "Dad!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Stop!" He turned back to me slowly, like it took effort. "You don't understand. It's easier if you don't fight it." That sentence hit me harder than the storm. It was the same thing Ruth had said, the same thing written in the ledger, the same thing I'd felt when the river softened under my boots. Easier. The water was calling to him the way it had called to me, not with threats, not with force, with relief. I grabbed his arm and pulled. His skin was ice cold, far colder than the rain. For a second, his eyes cleared. "Run," he whispered. The river roared in response. The concrete beneath the flood cracked open with a sound like bone snapping. A dark gap yawned open, deeper than it should have been, deeper than water could explain. Something moved inside it, not swimming, rising. I felt it then, an intelligence spread through the water, aware of every footstep, every hesitation. The ford wasn't hungry, it was owed. I remembered what my dad had said, that it only takes a few, that acknowledging it makes it ask for more. So I did what the town had never done. I acknowledged it out loud. "I see you," I shouted into the storm. "I know what you are." The water stilled. Every man turned toward me at once, their mouths opened, not to speak, but to breathe out a sound that vibrated in my chest. Not enough. The river surged again, higher, faster. One of the men slipped, then another. They didn't scream as the water took them, just stepped down, calm and accepting, disappearing beneath the surface like stones. My dad was next. I stood between him and the river. "Take me instead," I said. The words felt wrong in my mouth, too heavy, too final. The water pulled back slightly, as if considering. "You already belong to us," it answered, "but you haven't given yet." I understood then. The ford didn't want bodies, it wanted choices. Men who decided to step in. Men who believed they were doing the right thing. Men who carried guilt heavy enough to sink with them. I let go of my dad's arm. "Go," I told him. "Get out of here." For the first time, he fought. He staggered backward, away from the water, gasping like he'd just broken the surface after a long dive. Around us, the remaining men began to wake, confusion flickering across their faces as the pull weakened.
The river screamed. The gap beneath the concrete widened, water spiraling downward, dragging debris and broken barriers with it. The ford wasn't finished, but it was losing control. I stepped forward, cold wrapped around my ankles, my knees. "This is where you stay," it said. I shook my head. No. And for the first time, the ford didn't know what to do, because no one had ever said no from inside the water. The moment I refused, the rain stopped. Not gradually, not like storms usually end. 1 second it was hammering down. The next, there was only the sound of the river, angry, swollen, and confused. The men scattered like they'd just woken from the same nightmare. Some fell to their knees, others ran. A few stood frozen, staring at the water like it had betrayed them. The ford didn't retreat, it spread. Water surged past the crossing, swallowing yards, fields, fences. The river ignored its banks and rewrote the map of the town in real time. Roads collapsed, power lines snapped. Houses closest to the woods flooded knee-deep in minutes. The ford had been denied its offering, so it collected interest. The next week was chaos. They called it a 100-year flood, even though records showed nothing like it. Insurance adjusters came and shook their heads. FEMA trucks lined the main street. Reporters asked about the ford again. This time, the town couldn't lower its voice enough. 3 people died during the flooding, not taken by the ford, just caught in water where water had never been before. A child, an old woman, a man trapped in his basement. Different kinds of loss. The river had learned a new way to take. I stayed awake most nights, listening for my name. It never came again, not the way it had before, but I felt watched, like something was waiting to see if I'd slip. Ruth Holloway died the morning after the floodwaters receded. Peacefully, they said. I went to her house before anyone else could, found her journal on the table, opened to the last page. It doesn't forgive, it only waits. The committee disbanded after that. My dad never talked about the ford again. He moved away 2 months later without saying goodbye. Life tried to go back to normal. A bridge was built over the river the following spring. Concrete pylons driven deep, steel beams anchored tight. No more crossings, no more choices. People said the problem was solved. I knew better, because rivers don't forget being denied. Years passed. I left town, built a life elsewhere. I didn't talk about Hollis Ford. I didn't dream about it either, which felt worse somehow. Then last week, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered before I could stop myself. There was no voice on the other end, just the sound of flowing water. And something else. Footsteps. I looked out my apartment window at the street below. Rainwater pooled at the curb, reflecting streetlights. For a second, I swore I saw footprints forming in the shallow puddles, bare, deliberate, facing my building.
The line went dead. I don't live near that river anymore, but the ford was never just a place. It was a lesson, and lessons, once learned, don't stay buried.
After the call, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights on, staring at my phone like it might ring again just to prove I wasn't imagining things. Outside, traffic hissed over wet pavement. Normal city sounds, safe sounds. Still, I checked the floor. No footprints. I told myself that rivers don't travel, that whatever lived in Hollis Ford was bound to that stretch of water, that patch of ground, that bridges and distance mattered. I was wrong. Over the next few days, water began showing up where it didn't belong. The sink dripped even after I fixed it. The shower curtain clung to my legs like wet skin. Puddles lingered on sidewalks long after rain had stopped, thin films of water reflecting my face back at me, distorted, stretched like the river's surface. I started noticing men, always alone, always paused near water. A guy standing ankle-deep in a flooded underpass, staring down like he'd dropped something important. A construction worker sitting on the edge of a fountain during lunch, boots off, feet dangling in the basin. An old man by the riverwalk, murmuring to himself. I caught fragments as I passed. It's not deep. Just for a second. Feels familiar. One night, I followed one of them. He was younger than me, maybe mid-20s, wearing headphones. He stopped at a drainage canal behind an apartment complex, a narrow concrete channel with shallow, fast-moving water. He stepped down without hesitation. I shouted. He didn't hear me, or didn't want to. By the time I reached him, he was already waist-deep, eyes unfocused, moving against the current like he was being welcomed home. I grabbed his jacket and pulled. He fought me with surprising strength, fingers digging into my arms, nails tearing skin. "Let me go," he whispered. "It knows me." The water surged around his legs, tugging. I dragged him back onto dry ground. He collapsed, sobbing, confused, asking how he'd gotten there. We sat there for a long time, listening to the water rush past. I realized then what the ford had done. It had learned from me. I'd refused it, spoken to it, named it, and in doing so, I'd taught it that it didn't need Hollis Ford. It needed attention, choice. Men standing at the edge of water, believing they were alone. That night, I dreamed of the pit beneath the concrete, not buried anymore, but spreading, branching like veins through soil and stone, connecting every river, every drain, every puddle deep enough to reflect a man's face. I woke with my name on my lips, not spoken, remembered. The next morning, I found mud on my apartment floor. Wet, fresh, bare footprints leading from the bathroom to the front door. They were facing outward. Once I saw the footprints in my apartment, I stopped pretending this was something that would pass. I didn't clean them right away. I stood there, staring, committing every detail to memory,
The length of the stride, the weight pressed into the heel, the way the toes dug in slightly, like whoever made them had hesitated. They weren't mine, and they weren't a threat. They were a message. I called in sick to work and spent the day driving, following water, rivers first, then canals, storm drains, retention ponds behind shopping centers, anywhere water paused long enough to look like it might be listening. By sunset, the pattern was clear. It never took men who were with someone. It never pulled someone already drowning. It never crossed running water unless the man stepped into it willingly. Those were the rules. The Ford didn't hunt, it waited. That's why bridges worked. That's why crowds mattered. That's why it spoke softly instead of shouting. I went back to Ruth's journal that night. I'd photographed every page before her house was cleared. Reading it now, with the pattern in front of me, the meaning sharpened. It isn't punishment, it's balance. The river remembered men who tested themselves against it and expected something back. Strength, proof, release. And when men stopped offering themselves, it found other ways to remind them. Floods, collapse, erosion. I found one entry I'd missed before. Someone must stay aware. Someone must say no forever. That was the price, not a sacrifice, a witness. I understood then why the Ford hadn't taken me, why it had followed instead of finishing the job. It needed someone who knew the rules, someone who would intervene just enough to keep the balance without breaking it completely, someone who would always hear the call and refuse. That night, I got another call. This time, there was a voice. Mine. "I'm at the river," it said. "You should come." I hung up and ran. The city riverwalk was crowded. Joggers, couples, lights reflecting off calm water. I spotted him immediately. A man who looked exactly like me stood at the edge, shoes neatly placed behind him. He turned and smiled. "I get it now," he said. "You can rest." The water beside him was perfectly still. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "You're not me." He shrugged. "I'm what's left when you get tired." I shoved him. He fell backward into the river, vanishing without a splash. The water rippled once, then returned to glass. No one else noticed. I stood there shaking, realizing the final rule. The Ford doesn't just take men, it replaces them.
After that night, the calls stopped. No more whispers. No reflections speaking back. No footprints forming where I hadn't walked. That was how I knew the role had settled onto me fully. I didn't quit my job, but I changed how I lived. I took longer routes home, ones that crossed bridges instead of riverbanks. I avoided bars near waterfronts. I learned which parks flooded after rain and stayed away from them. More importantly, I started watching. You'd be surprised how many men pause near water without realizing they're doing it. How often hands slip into pockets, shoulders hunch, eyes soften. How the world goes quiet for them. I learned the signs, the slackening jaw, the slow exhale, the way they stop blinking. When I saw it, I intervened. Sometimes it was easy. A joke, a question, a light bump of the shoulder as I passed. Anything to break the moment. Other times, it wasn't. I pulled a man out of a retention pond behind a mall while he kicked and screamed at me to let him go. I stood in the middle of a flooded underpass during a storm and waved cars back, earning horns and curses. I spent hours talking to a guy on a pier, convincing him he'd dropped his keys, his wallet, anything to keep him from stepping down. They never remembered me afterward. That was another rule. Witnesses aren't remembered. At night, I dreamed of the Ford, not as it was, but as it wanted to be. Clean, quiet, men stepping forward one by one, relieved to finally stop fighting themselves. I woke with my heart racing and the taste of river water in my mouth. I don't age the way I should. That's not vanity talking. It's something I've noticed in reflections, in photos. Lines form, then fade. Hair goes gray, then dark again. Time doesn't grip me properly anymore. I think that's part of the payment. Balance doesn't want permanence. Every once in a while, I drive back toward my hometown. I never stop. I don't need to. I can feel the Ford from miles away, a pressure behind the eyes, a memory that isn't mine trying to surface. It's quieter now. Not gone, just watched. Last month, I failed. A man slipped past me during a storm. I was helping someone else, arguing, distracting, doing my job, and I missed him. They found his shoes by a drainage canal the next morning, neatly placed. I stood there with the police, listening to the explanations, the lies people tell themselves when water takes a man. The river didn't speak to me that night. That was worse, because silence means satisfaction. I don't know how long I can do this, how many years, how many faces, how many almosts. But I do know this. As long as men stand alone at the edge of water, someone has to stand closer. And if one day you feel the river watching you, if you hear your name in the sound of flowing water, look around. If you see a man nearby who seems oddly familiar, that's me, trying to keep you dry.
I don't remember the first time I realized I was tired. Not physically, not even mentally. I mean the exhaustion that seeps into your bones, the kind that sleep doesn't touch, the kind that settles into the marrow and tells you it won't leave until the job is done or until you are gone. It started subtly. A missed phone call, a man nearly slipping into a canal, and my voice cracking when I called out to him. I reached him just in time, but it left a mark, a shiver that wouldn't shake off. My reflection in mirrors became less familiar. Lines in my face lingered longer. Shadows under my eyes seemed to deepen overnight. The Ford doesn't care about tired. It doesn't care about logic or reason. It only cares about balance. A week ago, I drove back to the outskirts of my hometown. The river looked innocent again in daylight, shallow, slow, teasing you with quiet ripples. I remembered the first time I saw it at 17. The first footprints, the first shapes, Mark, my father, Ruth. And I understood that I might not always be able to stop it. I watched the water ripple under a fallen log, and I remembered every man it had taken, or almost taken, because someone had refused.
My chest tightened, my stomach churned. The truth settled over me like a cold blanket. Eventually, someone will fail. Eventually, the river will succeed. It always does. That night, I stayed in the old town for the first time in years. I parked near the ford, watching the water glow faintly under a half moon. The air smelled of mud and wet leaves. There was no storm, no sound, except the current moving over stones. And then I heard it. My name. Soft, gentle, insistent, familiar. I froze. Not because I thought it was the river. No, I knew it was the river, but because it sounded relieved. I didn't move, didn't answer, didn't step closer. The water shimmered unnaturally, spreading across the riverbank like it was breathing. I understood then what it wanted. Not me, not yet. It wanted the next man, the one unaware, alone, approaching carelessly. I saw him in the distance, a boy no older than 17. He was walking down the dirt path toward the water, headphones on, eyes locked on his phone, oblivious. My instinct screamed at me to intervene, to pull him back, to remind him of the rules. I ran, but even as I ran, I realized something worse. What happens when the watcher tires? I'll be there, but not enough. I'll miss the wrong step. I'll fail someone who doesn't understand the choice being offered. And when that happens, the ford will remember, and it will spread like it did during the flood, like it always does when the balance slips. I've been standing at the edge for decades, keeping men from stepping down, keeping the river from learning new ways to take. And yet every year, every decade, it grows smarter, wider, hungrier. I am the observer, the guard, the silent witness, the man who refuses. But I am still human. One day I will tire, and the ford will finally claim what it has been owed. Until that day, I wait, watching, always watching.